Hey everybody, welcome to Moment of Clarity. Thanks for being here. Please take a second to share it, to let everyone know. Click thumbs up and subscribe. For those of you who are watching live, you can donate, and all of the donations go to people in need right now. If you're not watching live, which most of you are not, then you can also donate on Venmo at Lee Camp, and all of those donations will go to those in need, those struggling right now. So please, if you're able to, do that. And let's see, I'm also live on Rockfin. But yeah, thanks a lot for being here. And I got a fun episode for you today. I thought it'd be a good idea to take a break from all the vice presidential and presidential candidates we've had on this week. What was it? Three vice presidential or presidential candidates have been on this week. So I thought I'd switch it up and have on an incredible comedian, but he also has two killer podcasts, which you may be familiar with, The Dollop and the one I'm a big fan of, The West Wing Thing. So let's bring in Dave Anthony.
Hello.
Hey, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You haven't by chance run for president or vice president, have you?
Not yet, but I did make a promise on the West Wing that I would run for governor if there was a recall. So it appears I might be running for governor.
Oh, man.
It'll be the worst campaign ever.
What was it, Gary Coleman and a porn star? And
Yeah. I mean, if the porn star and Gary Coleman can do it, I can do it, right? That'll be the worst campaign ever, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I've been loving the West Wing thing particularly, although I know you do a lot of excellent work in a variety of ways. But also, it was like the more I'd learn about you, the more it seemed like we should meet because we had so many similarities, you know?
We do.
Both doing stand-up for years, both left wing, both doing shows of sorts, both attacked for not falling for the Russiagate hysteria.
Yes.
I didn't know there were other comedians out there other than like me and Jimmy Dore. It seemed like
it's like five of us that are like, no, that's not right. That's it. Just five. Because it's so great that so many comedians don't actually question anything anymore. That's really great. That's really what the job is.
Yeah, I don't know. Are those days over where where there was like a lot of comedians that were actually pushing the borders of what was like allowable rather than just going for the neoliberal bullshit?
It's so crazy to watch, especially look, you got Bill Hicks behind you on the wall, and that's like, when I was doing comedy in San Francisco and Hicks would come through, every comic in the whole city would be lined up watching him, but apparently no one took in what he was doing.
Didn't learn anything. Yeah, didn't learn a damn thing.
It's pretty amazing to watch.
Well, and Hicks is kind of the quintessential example of, and I don't know whether this was the standard for a long time or it was getting worse, but of a comedian's set being censored or not allowed on late night. Of course, his final set was the one that Letterman famously ultimately apologized for, whatever, 20 years later, cutting it basically because it had some pro-life, pro-choice jokes. But yeah, I don't like the late night shows don't really allow on like political thought that's outside kind of the corporate mainstream.
At all. They just won't, and they never will. It's just not going to happen. I mean, Carlin was probably the last guy that ever really, really got away with it, I would say. And that was just because he was sort of grandfathered in, He
was grandfathered in, and it was HBO, which was kind of young at the time.
Yeah, but they're not going to look for anybody who's left or outside the mainstream to have any kind of special anymore. You got to stay within the lines, which is great. It's good for the art.
Yeah. It's great for the art. I mean, and many of them that people can point to, that really push those limits. Pryor, Lenny Bruce, they kind of got famous doing more palatable stuff for the mainstream.
Yeah.
And then once they went further, it was like too late. Like you couldn't contain them anymore because they were famous and doing edgy shit. So
yeah, it's weird. I never thought of that, but you're right. And it's almost like now everyone's learned a different lesson, which is you stay in that lane and then you get there and then really stay in that lane. Like then don't mess it up because you're on the gravy train.
Right.
Which is kind of weird, but
right.
Yeah. I mean, and the guys who do stuff, it's just from more of a right-wing angle, complaining about, making trans jokes or complaining about, woke people and all that stuff, and it's just like, well, who cares?
I mean, we gotta put trans people in their place. I mean, they've been living.
I mean, come on, they're so out of control.
They're living high on the hog for too long here.
Yeah, really. I mean, that's it. You got to punch up, and you got to punch up and trans people. They're the ones. Dumb.
I just did. I don't normally spend a whole 10-minute segment on Redacted Tonight tearing apart a TV show, but. I just did hasn't even aired yet. I just did a whole long segment on Greg Gutfeld's new quote unquote comedy show.
Oh God, I haven't seen it. It's the Fox one, right? I just heard it was just unbelievable. It's so weird because usually right wing and comedy goes together so well. It's usually, you think about all the great comedy shows, it's always like, oh, right wing.
Yeah. It really does go together well. It's kind of amazing because he has a little studio audience that I assume are fans of his other Fox News garbage, and like literally you can hear him pause for jokes like that things he says that he thinks are jokes, and even his fans don't know to laugh. Like everyone's just kind of like, what?
That's happening. That's always what right-wing comedy is. It's like they're saying something and they think it's a punchline, but you're like, no, that's just, you're making a statement. There's no joke happening at all. And then they all laugh because like, aren't we just supposed to be mean? No, there's supposed to be like a comedy part that comes in.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I wanted to, so the West Wing thing, which, some fans of my stuff are going to have seen West Wing. Some of them maybe were wise enough not to watch all of West Wing. When I was like in college and maybe briefly after college, I watched most of the episodes, enjoyed them immensely. I was like, this show's so woke, and I was also, at the time, I was also a kind of a mainstream Democrat. So it seemed like they were getting it right. And and then I slowly woke up to the fact that it was like a neoliberal's fantasy of like, what if we actually were pure-hearted and everything America did was like largely like we're just trying to make things good for people,
Yeah, we're just trying to do the good things to help everybody in the world by really doing nothing at our own country. Nothing is ever accomplished. And my favorite thing about the show is how there'll always be some sort of foreign situation. They have to go into a country, whether it's to rescue someone or whatever, and they end up killing people who shot back at us. My favorite was when they had to rescue some guys. I think it was in Colombia or something, and they take the helicopter down, and the report is that they shot back, and so we killed them. And it's like, well, you landed in their country. Like what? And they're just like, no, they're not supposed to shoot at us. We're America. And it's like, you're in their country, man. It's just so crazy.
Well, yeah. Speaking of that, something I noticed after I think I'd seen most of the West Wing was, and you guys, I haven't heard all of your podcasts, so you might have discussed this aspect, but I don't know. But nothing in the foreign policy in the West Wing that I ever saw was America doing something to another country without being provoked. It's all we're just trying to be ourselves and live on our little plot of land. And these people keep causing problems for us. Like,
that's right.
At no point are they just like, oh, hey, like internally meeting, like let's crush Venezuela because we want their oil and they're socialists.
That's right. Yeah, none of those points come up. None of the points that we want their stuff is ever said. It's just like, well, we were just there, and then they started shooting. We were in Iraq, and they started shooting at us. You're like, you invaded. Yeah, there's no. The show really just rests on American exceptionalism. So there's no looking at our part in anything. It's always just like, hey, we're doing our thing. We're trying to spread democracy around the world, and then people just want to kill us. It's just such childlike thinking, but I've never seen the show explore anything close to what reality is, where we're literally destabilizing the entire world to try to get oil and minerals and whatever else we can get. It never comes up. It's not a thing.
Yeah. No, well, it's not important. It never comes up. But you guys kind of have this thesis on the show, which I think very well may be true, that Sorkin has influenced a lot of people in America, like powerful people.
Yeah. So there's the first time we clued into this was Luke Savage wrote an article called "The Obama Boys," which he went through all the books of everybody who worked in the Obama administration, and then he wrote about them. And they all talk about the West Wing and how much of an influence it was on them, and the whole place is running on the idea that the West Wing is how you govern, like it's like a roadmap. And it's so disturbing to actually think that we had people in power who live in a fantasy world that never existed, basing their governing on a TV show that's made by essentially, Adam McKay made this point the other day and everyone yelled at him, but Aaron Sorkin's right wing. In any other country in the world, he would be solidly center right.
Right.
He is. And so, but that's what everyone took away from the show, is like, oh, well, those opinions are okay. And it's like, no, most of opinions are not okay. I mean, there's a speech. So 9/11's never happened on the West Wing. That's not a reality, but they have speeches where they're like, we have to turn Saudi Arabia into a parking lot. Is that what we have to do? And you're like, what do you, is this a liberal show? And you're talking about taking over Saudi Arabia? Like, what is happening right now? It's really the places he goes, and there's never any exploration. There's nothing deep. It forgets history, or there is no history to them, and they just plow forward with these terrible ideas, horrendous ideas. The show is full of horrendous ideas. They had a show where the first lady brought up child slavery from some African nation was partaking in, and they had to talk her down and explain to her why she couldn't bring it up right now because someone was trying to pass a bill, and she ends up essentially apologizing for bringing up child slavery because you got to make a deal on some stupid thing with the right wing, and it's just like, what are you doing? Where's your moral compass?
Yeah. Well, actually, that may be one of the truer moments, because that is how most of those people think. I mean, they would never bring up child slavery, but anytime they speak out, it is a long string of calculations that could be done on a chalkboard as to whether something can be said about this while this is happening, and can I get this? And
yeah, it's a nightmare. But the thing to always remember is it's a TV show, and on a TV show, you should be able to do whatever you want. I mean, it's your liberal fantasy. So shouldn't you have healthcare for all? Shouldn't you be, pulling troops out of countries? Like, what is your fantasy world? It's just as bad as the real world, apparently. Like, that's their fantasy. Hey, we finally got the White House. We got a smart president. Let's do nothing. Really, nothing. Let's do nothing.
Well, and they also, the president is supposedly an economics professor, and they never really address any of the harms of capitalism at all.
At all. I mean, I can't. I always think it'd be so amazing if a communist or a socialist came in and just had a meeting and just talked to them. I don't understand what's happening. They would have no clue. But that stuff is never. I mean, even when environmentalists are on the show, they're just these crazy hippie weirdos.
Oh, like the highway for animals or something.
Yes. Oh, great one. Yeah. Someone wanted to build a highway, I think, for wolves, and they just mocked them. And it's like, no, that's actually a good thing, because wolves get killed on the road. So just build them an overpass. And they were just like, okay, crazy.
Right. Really... The four remaining mammals in North America. Build them a road. Build them a road. Yeah.
And never mind going to how important wolves are. Have you ever heard the TED Talk where a guy discusses how bringing wolves back into Yosemite ended up changing the formation of the streams because everything went back to normal? So the actual shape of the streams changed. I mean, so this isn't just West Wing. This is the entirety of like American politics and leaders and business leaders. It's like all this shit is interconnected. Like, you kill off all the insects with Monsanto herbicides or pesticides or whatever. And it's like things eat insects, and we eat those things. Like, it's all interconnected, you assholes. Yeah. It turns out when this all came together and started working, it would actually work for a reason. It's all sort of tied together. Yeah, that's not even part of our equation right now.
Not so much. Another great moment where you guys brought it up in a way that brought up something that I never would have thought of. But so there's a bit of a black person problem with most Sorkin stuff, meaning lack of black people or their stereotypical
understanding them. Yes,
understanding them. But so there is one prominent black character in the West Wing, which is Charlie, who's basically the president's assistant, for lack of a better term. But on the episode where they're actually discussing whether it would look bad to have a black assistant to a white president, and they have an episode about that, but I can't remember. One of you guys was like, yeah, but Sorkin wrote in a black general to say it's fine. Go ahead, do it. And it's like, you can't write in your own like black savior to tell you that it's fine.
Sorkin has this pattern where whenever he knows something is wrong, like Charlie's the character you're talking about, and he wasn't brought on the show until like 6 episodes in or something, because the show started and it was all white characters. Yeah. And this is after Clinton. Like Clinton had a fairly diverse cabinet considering, and people are like, no black people at all. And so then they bring in a black guy who's the assistant to the president. And so it's already this meta thing where on one episode, they're talking about how should Charlie be carrying his stuff. And you're like, that's what the show is already. Like you built that into the TV show. And then anytime someone brings something up, anytime there's any sort of African-American issue, anything, this general walks in, he's just like, no, why would I care about that? I don't care about that. And then leaves. And it's just Sorkin being like, that's right. That guy said it. You're like, no, you said it. It's your show. You brought in a guy to say the thing. You're writing it. Like, it's just, and it happens all the time. It happens with women stuff. It just,
same with women. There's when there's something bad towards women, there's a woman to go, no, that's how we like it.
Yes. I mean, there was an episode where it was about sexual harassment, and he has a female Republican lawyer on the show, and she comes in, and Rob Lowe is he's just like, he would have to go to HR with the stuff he's saying. They'd be like, you have to go to HR right now and talk to them. You're really out of control. And he goes to her and he goes, this doesn't matter, right? And she goes, no, it's fun. It feels like you're part of the guys. And you're like, no, that's what sexual harassment is. But he has this lady there and you're like, no, it's literally just Sorkin saying terrible stuff and going, now I'll have a character come in and say why it's not a terrible thing. It's really amazing.
Yeah, it's an amazing technique. I mean, maybe I need to use it more, but I'll just write characters into my show that'll show up and tell me it's fine to be offensive. You're fine.
It's the person who always backs the white guy. Just the other character comes in. You're fine, white guy. You're doing great. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
I don't have, and then there's other Sorkin projects. Have you watched any of Newsroom?
I have not. I've seen the couple of really the big speeches, and I've seen the plane, the famous plane scene.
That was the worst.
I mean, that's like maybe the worst thing that's ever happened to America.
It's the worst thing ever on television. Yes, but
it's really incredible. Like that's where his mind lives.
I probably shouldn't admit this, but I also have seen the Newsroom, and I
did you watch it all?
The vast majority of it.
So you're like a self-cutter. You like to punish yourself.
Yeah. There's totally a masochist, but it's a liberal. And now because my show's on RT, so I'm in a newsroom, so I see news being made all day long, and I kind of can I can visualize what these places are like and everything, and it's like a liberal fantasy of a newsroom, but. What I found, incredibly hilarious. I mean, his Occupy episodes are fucking so hysterical because I was at Occupy, so I know the reality of it versus the fucking horseshit he's portraying.
Yeah.
But also, I think it's maybe the first or second episode. They have breaking news about the Blackwater Horizon. Is that what it's called? In Deepwater Horizon in Blackwater. It's a mercenary.
Well, that'll come. Give that time.
The Deepwater Horizon in the Gulf has just sunk, and they go on to solve the mystery of why the platform sunk, which is faulty concrete made by Halliburton, and they solve it all within a 1 hour news broadcast. And here's the reality in our world is that to this day, the mainstream media has not covered that angle. It was mainly discovered by Greg Palast, an investigative journalist who's not allowed on our mainstream.
He's not at all. He's not at all.
No. So it's like, and you're acting like good newsrooms do this coverage. They fucking don't. They don't.
No, they would, as soon as they got near it, at like the 45-minute mark of the hour broadcast, to be like, hey, does this seem like it might be about the concrete that Halliburton put in there? Let's switch to something else. Let's get off the story. Let's get off of it.
Yeah.
Immediately. There's no way. That investigative reporting never happens because they're like, well, how much ads do we get from Halliburton and their subsidiaries? We shouldn't do this story. That's a bad story.
Which is why I love the ads for weapons contractors on like CNN and Fox News. Whenever you see like a Raytheon ad, and you have to ask yourself, is that because Raytheon is selling to a lot of grandmas living in Poughkeepsie? Is that why they need those ads? Or is it so they can own CNN?
Yes. Yeah. It's good. It's a good sign for everybody in our country. It's doing very well.
So the harm that you point out Sorkin did to politics with The West Wing, he then did to media with Newsroom.
Yeah. Someone the other day when Adam McKay did that thing that blew up and everyone was mad at him for saying Aaron Sorkin's to the right, someone pointed out, they're like, well, Anchorman is actually a better satire and take on newsrooms than the actual Newsroom was.
Yep, absolutely. And so I think you did, but didn't you do a special episode on the Chicago 7 trial on Netflix? The movie.
I mean, so that's sort of an ongoing issue with liberals, is that they co-opt leftist leaders. I mean, you go back to MLK. At the time they didn't like MLK. MLK was a problem.
Especially that last year.
Yes, that's right. I mean, especially he comes out against the Vietnam War and stuff, and they're not liking him, and they're mostly talking about the same sort of pushback you get from BLM, right? The same sort of pushback you get from defund the police. It's the same feeling that they had. So when you go into these places, it's always liberals being scared of what's happening, and then they co-opt it, and then years later, they're like, we love Martin Luther King. And you're like, you guys didn't like Martin Luther King.
Right.
Like, no, he's our guy. And he's like, he wasn't your guy. You were actually scared of him. You in the suburbs. You were terrified that black people were going to come to your suburbs. There's all these newspaper articles because I go through old newspapers and I'm just reading them. I'm just like, well, they were terrified. And so it's the exact same thing with his Chicago 7 movie. He took what was a bunch of guys who wanted to overthrow. They wanted a revolution. They wanted a new government. They decided this government didn't work. And then Sorkin comes in and rewrites this movie, and they're all like, we just need better people in there. We just need small changes. We don't need big changes. And it's just like you're literally rewriting Revolutionaries to co-opt it. And then you have all these people just fawning over. He'll probably win the Academy Award, considering what the topic is and how they act like, this is who we all were. But again, they hated these people. They did not like any of these people. These people, they were scared of them, were their enemies. They were socialists and everything else. And the way they're rewritten, my favorite scene of all, in reality, one day, two of the people on trial came in and put down an American flag and a Vietnamese flag.
Yeah.
And then started reading the names of the dead from Vietnam, but not the American names. Americans, Viet Cong, together.
Yep.
And that was a really big moment in the trial.
The judge was yelling at them.
Yeah. Yes, the judge is screaming at them. They're not stopping. I mean, it's a big moment for Abby Hoffman. And then in the movie, that's the middle of the trial, but in the movie, it's the end of the trial. And they're just reading American names, and everyone is like,
and only the American flag.
It's mind-boggling that you, even though I get it, you're a liberal, you want things to be a certain way, but this is history. You don't get to rewrite history, and then you're taking our leftist heroes and just bastardizing them for your own way. And then you want us to be on the same team. Well, if you want us to be on the same team, acknowledge history and acknowledge who we are and what we want.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty incredible. I got the trial transcript book of the Chicago 7, and they've added a foreword by Aaron Sorkin.
Oh no! God.
And here's perhaps the best part is he says when Steven Spielberg came to me and asked me to make to write a script for the Chicago 7, I said, absolutely, great idea. I didn't admit to him at the time I'd never heard of them.
So could you imagine saying that in an interview? Like admitting to that, being like, I just don't know stuff, but I write about it. Like if you came to me with a project and you're like, hey, can you do this? I'd be like, I have no idea what that is. I'm probably not the guy for it. But he's just like, I got this. And
yeah, I think it was in his mind. I think it's a humble brag that I don't even know leftist leaders because they're fairly meaningless to me. But more importantly, I cannot know history, and I'm so brilliant I can take it all in and make the best script that's ever been written, even on something I didn't know.
Yeah, and the reason he can do that is because most Americans don't know history, so he gets away with it, and he gets people fawning over the movie. So it does work, right? He can do it, and everyone's fine with it, and he thinks he can write anything. Like, you give him any subject, and he can write it. But I'm not a big fan of his writing. I think, I watched The West Wing back in the day, the first couple seasons, and I liked his writing back then too. But as I watched it from a critical eye over the time period, I became less and less excited by his writing, which can be pretty lazy.
Yeah, and I think that simply the fact that it is people speaking fast back and forth, there's like not enough of that in television because I think they try and slow everything down. I mean, some of the most recent superhero movies, I think they're written for English as a second language or something.
They are.
Like 4-word sentences and stuff.
They are.
I think if you're of an even moderate intelligence, you're just excited that people are speaking quickly.
Yeah, no, I will totally agree with that 100%. Yeah, I mean, it's like there is something to it. It's whatever part of your brain. When people are sitting down, it's a different conversation. When people are walking and talking, it just stimulates you more for some reason. So he has people walking down hallways saying stuff, but if you sat them down across from each other on the couch, it'd be like, what are they doing? Why are they talking like this? It would just be weird. Right. There's little tricks in there, the tricks worked, obviously.
Oh yeah, it's catnip for liberals. I guess I'll wrap up here by asking you about stand-up. You have a long and impressive stand-up career. Are you excited to get back out there once the pandemic's over?
I don't like. We're going out with our podcast in Australia in October. I usually do some stand-up in front of the when we do the podcast to do a little bit. I'm really confused about what to do right now. Because everything's so dystopian and so dark. I mean, I think so much more than when the pandemic started. And it's like, how much do people want to hear that? Right. Obviously, I think my audience is a little more geared toward it, and yours probably is. But then it's like, how many people just want to break? Are they going to want to hear my dark rantings about the world? True. And then the other thing is like, do you want to bring people together in groups? I mean, we're doing it in Australia, and it's like, it's a different place, right? They're literally living in a different world where they don't have COVID, and the whole game plan is COVID.
So you're gonna fly over and be in a hotel room for 14 days?
Yeah, 14 days in a hotel room, and then I think a 6-city tour, and hopefully we can do New Zealand also. But then coming back, do you think about how much your material is going to change? Like, are you at all trepidatious about which ways to go? I mean, you've always been pretty political. So
I mean, my stuff was so dark before the pandemic that I don't know it could get any worse. But I mean, my stuff's all pretty heavy in that regard. But I do wonder, but you raise a good point of whether people will, because they're kind of having to wake up to how things are getting dark, climate change, everything else. do they want to hear more of that because they're like, well, I got to learn about this shit? Or do they feel like they want just pure entertainment? Don't even mention it. I feel like I'm seeing maybe less escapism. Like it seems like there's more people. They're not always right, but there's more people talking about what's going on in the world because you kind of can't avoid it.
Yeah. But I also wonder, like, you're a guy who is always out there doing dark stuff. Now, are you going to be now part of many? Because all these other comics who used to talk about Fruit Loops and ghosts, now they're going to actually be talking about stuff that matters.
Man, I always say that although it's good for my career, I would love to have more comics doing like real leftist material. But instead I just compete with the other three, and and that's it. But I'm sure there'd be a part of me that's like, damn it, that's my thing. But I don't know.
It's so funny. Right before the like 6 months before the COVID happened, my father passed away, and he was a terrible man. Right. He was an absolutely terrible man. And so I had a bit where I went on stage and be like, my father passed away recently. I'd get choked up, and then I'd start talking about how happy I was and just go through the litany of things that were horrible about him. And I'm like, I wonder if that would work now. Because it was killing. And now I'm like, well, now I'm doing a bit where I'm happy my dad died. And I had like a whole 10-minute chunk on it. It was great. And now I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah. No, there is a weird thing where it's like people can laugh at it when it's kind of distant from their lives. But when it starts to really end up in their lives, it stops being funny.
That's right.
So I wonder about all my climate change material and stuff. It's like, if I go to Texas and the people in the crowd literally lost their power for fucking 2 weeks.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. They're like, oh, my wife died in the cold in our living room. You're like, oh, so not that funny to you, the climate change stuff? Okay.
So is this why stand-up's not as big in Myanmar? Is this?
Yeah, that might be it.
Is this why? Oh, God. Well,
it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, we're the guys who didn't go out on the road, and I was watching a bunch of comics go out on the road, which is always very, very, very weird to me to watch.
Well, yeah, and I don't know. It's like comedy's tough enough, but then you have the room 2/3 empty and everybody with masks on, and it's like,
oh no, they didn't. Most clubs didn't have masks. What they would do is they would keep the masks on in the waiting room. They would wear them to the table. When they got down to the table, they could take the masks off for the whole show, and then they'd put them on again to leave. I swear to God.
So was was this just like Colin Quinn and Nick DiPaolo, or like who were these people?
I was always surprised. When I saw a comedian that I really enjoy, and I'd be like, "What are you doing? Why are you going there?" There were guys who weren't getting checks, so they had to go out on the road and possibly die. Like, I mean, that's like any other industry, right? You work in a meatpacking plant, no different. You got to make a living.
Yeah. Well, I obviously hope it gets better for comics. I don't know. Well, then not anyone else, just comics. But then maybe this pandemic killed off a whole I don't mean literally dead. I mean, but killed their careers off of like a whole younger generation that wasn't. So we have less to compete with.
I think that's definitely true. I think there's a lot of young comics and people who are on the fringes that would just be gone. So is that what we're saying? We're saying that's a good thing.
Yeah. Happy for that.
Looking for the silver lining in COVID.
Hey, man, I don't want to use up all your time. I really enjoyed talking with you. I hope we can do this again soon. And I want everyone to check out the West Wing thing and the Dollop and any other site they should go to.
That's it. Those are my things. That's all we got.
Okay. Great.
Thanks for having me on, man.
Thanks again, man.
All right. See ya.
All right, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. Dave Anthony. Pleasure to have him on. Definitely check out those podcasts. The West Wing thing was the one we were talking about with all the mocking of Aaron Sorkin content and liberal catnip. I'm going to leave it there for today, but I'll be doing a new Government Secrets with Graham Elwood in a few minutes, actually. That will air live on his channel, on Graham Elwood's YouTube channel, but we will have it up on the podcast platforms and everything within a day or two. And yeah, thanks a lot. I'll see you Sunday for the live stream where we collect donations and give them out to those in need. If you're someone who is struggling, you can email commoncensored@protonmail.com and let us know. And thanks a bunch. Keep fighting.